What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Fluff Hammer. Yesterday I uploaded the Abaddon base. Got an absolutely massive surprise of kind of love and stuff on that. It got over, was nearly at 600 likes on Twitter, so really appreciate that. Thanks everyone for liking that. So I thought, yeah, might as well do a tutorial for it. I was planning to do one, maybe not that quickly, but yeah, I've gone into work early this morning, got the tutorial done, so let's get into it. Okay, so first up here is the base I have done for Ezekiel Abaddon. That was the one I'd done yesterday and uploaded to social media. So today is going to be this 90mm oval. I didn't have another one of the large rounds to do. I'm just going to use a chisel edged brush, and this colour is Beastly Brown from Vallejo Game Colour. Now this is going to be somewhere between a glaze and a wash. So as you can see there, I've probably added 2 parts water to 1 part paint. And that's basically because I don't want a solid black in the deepest recesses. That's too high a contrast for what I'm going for here. So as you can see, as we're putting it on, it is very similar to a wash or a glaze. Bit stronger than a glaze probably, but yeah, this is the kind of consistency, and this will just, like I said before, just get the recesses into an almost black but still brown, and it also adds a nice kind of base hue for this to work off. And this will obviously settle in the recesses as well, which is what we need when we'll be doing dry brushing later, as we pick up the high surfaces. And one thing I had with the Abaddon base was this kind of lipped edge here. Make sure and get right under there, because I left a few black spots that I had to go back in and retouch. So yeah, just keep an eye out for that. Next up, we're going to grab our favourite dry brush and Beastie Brown, again from Vallejo Game Colour. And I've moved on to away from the wet palette onto a piece of kitchen towel. This is Plenty kitchen towel, but I'm sure there's hundreds of other brands. I really like this. It's nice and tough, so you can work it quite hard. But that's, you know, preferential choices. I'm sure there's plenty of very good kitchen rolls. I'm going to do quite a heavy dry brush here, so I'm not getting it to a point where there's no paint on the brush at all, or it's more like somewhere between like an overbrush where you're brushing it with wet paint and then a dry brush. As you'll see here, it's going to pick up quite a lot of the details, and this is good because it gives us a solid mid-tone to work from, and you will still get some of that kind of blacky brown glaze we did from the first stage in the deepest, darkest recesses, and it's keeping it all the same hue, which is really good as well. So this is the next stage. So next up, we're going into Vallejo Game Colour Bone White, and as you can see, I haven't washed my dry brush, and also I'm depositing the paint straight on top of the Beastie Brown and going to mix them together in the kitchen towel. So it's going to make a kind of somewhere close to a 50-50 mix without being mega accurate. It doesn't matter too much if you aren't mega accurate at these kind of blending stages, because you'll just have to make do with what you want when it comes to it. As you can see, I got a bit of streaking there, so there was too much paint on the brush, so I'm just working it around my hand and on the kitchen towel. There we go. So that's a much better consistency. The streaking's not too much of a problem on this early stage because it's easily covered. As you'll now see, I'm doing kind of forward and backward strokes and some round and rounds, just to get kind of all the high points without getting in any of those recessed text. And as you can see already, that streaking that we had on there is gone already, so that wasn't too much of an issue to deal with. But it's just something to be wary of when you are dry brushing. Make sure you don't have too much paint on your brush. You can test it on your hand or on a bit of kitchen towel. I did test it on the towel there, but I obviously had a deposit in the brush somewhere either deep down or on one side. And yeah, as you can see, I'm just working forward and backward with the bone white. So next up, I've just added some more bone white to the tissue paper, and I'm just using that. Basically, we're creating the blends on the surface and within the brush, so we're retaining some of the previous colour, which helps tie it all together. You don't get kind of jumps between like a, say, a brown to an ochre to a bone white. You're going to get much more of a seamless transition. And here I am just working it on my finger, making sure with this kind of bright white that we don't get any streaking, because we're close to the kind of end stages of the dry brushing now, and streaks at this point would be hard to kind of correct. And I'm basically just picking out some bits here rather than doing it all over. I'm picking out some selective highlights now. So I'm working on, as you can see, closer to the edges, a little bit down these cracks where one side is slightly raised, and across the right high points of the base. Next up, we'll be applying some weathering powder. There's some dark yellow ochre from Vallejo, and this is rust pigment from Vallejo, and the first one was Humbrol, but actually, annoyingly, nowhere on that entire bottle does it say what shade or what colour that is. I will put a link in the description below, or try and find if it's got like a product code or anything. This is the Humbrol one I'm using first. As you can tell, it is very, very yellow. It's not, I wouldn't even class it as a yellow ochre. It's much more of like a sand colour. And I don't know if anyone has used these before, but they are different to probably anything else you're going to use in the hobby. So it's an actual powder, as you probably saw from the jars, and I'm just working it around. Once you've kind of placed it where you want, you can remove powder like I'm doing here. I don't want it too much in my highlights. Generally, if you was to go into some dusty old ruins, the sand and stuff doesn't sit on the high points on the highlights. It falls in these little cracks down in these crevices. So that's where I'm aiming to put that next. And then once we've finished with this stage, this is a pipette which has just got pure isopropyl alcohol on it. I think it's about 80%. It doesn't really matter the percentage, but you have to be very careful here, because if you rub this paint whilst it's got isopropyl alcohol on it, you will just rub the paint off. There is other ways of setting it. I think Vallejo now do a pigment set. I haven't used it, haven't tried it. I like isopropyl alcohol. It's like a capillary action, as you saw. It just spreads through the lot, and you don't have to worry too much about it. And within about 10 minutes it's dry. And although that hasn't really sealed the pigment, we're going to be doing that at the end. So all I need to do is just make sure that pigment is kind of sealed for now. Next up, I'm just going to pick out the little skull. Feel free to paint skulls however you choose to paint yours. I'm starting with a base coat of XV88 from Citadel. Next up, I'm going to be applying some Agrax Earthshade all over the skull to give that a nice shade in the recesses. And also here I'm going to kick back some of the powder. So some of this area like here, which I think is a bit too yellowy, I'm going to pick out some recesses with the Agrax Earthshade. And then also just here, I'm just going to kick back some of that powder. It's just gone a bit too bright and a bit too yellowy for my liking. Sometimes you can't always judge how these powders are going to react once you've set them with the alcohol. As you can see on the top main planes where the writing is, the yellow has been really kicked back nicely as it settled. However, I think the powder was just a bit too heavy on the flat area to the right hand side of the skull, so just using some Agrax to kick that back a little bit and just add some shades in the recesses there. Then we're going into Dunkelbug Light Base from AK, and I'm going to use that to highlight the skull, followed by the Bone White from Vallejo, and then the Off-White from Vallejo for a final highlight. I'm just doing a little bit of wet blending forward and backward here on that skull. Like I said, this isn't really a very important part of this tutorial really. I just thought I'd show you how I done it, just for the complete process. Next we're going to grab our dark yellow ochre powder from Vallejo, and we're going to just add some of that onto some of the other patches. Here I'm looking to basically blend the two different kind of powders, so I'm going to use it in places where there already is some of the yellow. As you can see, this is much warmer kind of orangey tone, and it's really good for, again, like the natural look. You would have different hues of yellow, different hues of kind of sandy tones. I've actually got another couple of powders coming this week from Element Games, so I'll be adding them to the repertoire. Probably looking to use them on the kind of feet and shin pads of the models to go on these bases as well. And as you can see with this one, I'm putting a little bit around the skull that's already finished, so that's a nice way of incorporating that. Once it's fully painted, the powder goes on top, so that blends that back into the environment as well. And then you can probably see with the last one I was using a much larger brush. This time I've gone with more of a detail brush, and once I'm happy where everything is, kind of just blending bits forward and backwards, rubbing off any extra, I'm then going to set this again with isopropyl alcohol. As you can see here, it's just got a great capillary action, just a few drops, nothing too wet. The pipette, I don't even squeeze it, I just tap it on the model, so that's just a good way of getting everything set and done. Next up, we're going to be painting the grate, whatever you want to call that bit, drain at the front. I'm starting with Tinny Tin from Vallejo, and yeah, it's just standard base coat really. I've mixed that 50-50 roughly with water. Tinny Tin is one of those paints that doesn't really have a great reputation for texture or consistency. I find you can use some Liquitex flow improver with it, because that doesn't actually reduce the coverage as much as adding water, but for ease of use I just added water for the tutorial. The flow improver was only about 2 foot away, but I didn't really need it for this. It don't need a mega solid base coat, as a lot of it will be kind of covered up. Next we go into Brassy Brass from Vallejo. Once again, I'm using the same brush as I was before. I'm using the tissue technique here to get somewhere between a dry brush and a wet brush, and I'm using the Citadel layer brush. I find the bristles on this splay really badly, but that actually makes it really effective for this kind of stippling. I don't want it to be smooth and shiny, I want it to look textured, I want it to look scratched and chipped and dented like a drain that would be in these kind of ruins. And as you can see, I'm just building it up slowly. You can see the brush just splaying more and more as I go. But actually it's really useful because it gives you just different textures. And then I'm going to build up on these two middle lines and closer to the front of the base, just basically like a lighting effect. Now we're going to be working on some weathering. I've just got a lid from an old pot and a nice bag of bicarb of soda. I did feel a bit suspicious driving to work with this on the dashboard this morning, but there's no way I could have stole the wife's whole tub of bicarb of soda without getting in trouble. So I thought it'd be easier to just stick it in a bag, and yeah, here's what it is. So I'm going to be mixing that with some teal ink from Liquitex and also some PVA glue, which is what I'm just getting out here, a bit of PVA glue, and also the paint Verdigris from Vallejo Game Colour again. If anyone is interested, if you comment down below, I can give you a Citadel alternative to all of these colours. Most of them you can get very, very close to with the Citadel palette. I just had loads of Vallejo kicking around at home when I painted the first base, so I just went with Vallejo because all my Citadels were at the studio. So yeah, and here I'm just going to use the ink to mix the Verdigris from Vallejo. As you can see, it's very, very pale, and I wanted it to have more of a bluey tone, so I'm just mixing some of that ink in to just give it a bit more kind of saturation, really. I'm not mixing a huge amount of that blue though, because, you know, naturally you don't get kind of fluorescent Verdigris. You can see now I'm just showing you the brush and the texture, the consistency, and it's probably like a really, really thick weathering powder. And I'm just going to choose a direction basically, and I'm going to try and get loads of that paste and powder into the grills and the grates. As you can see, just from the ink, it's flowing nicely. I think you'd struggle for consistency without that ink, so you would want to add something like a contrast paint or water or a medium just to thin that down. And then I'm brushing over the surface with my finger to take the Verdigris away from the top layer again. So once again we're creating that kind of the corrosion in the gaps, in the crevices, rather than being on top of the surface, which is again the kind of effect we're looking for from how it would be in real life. So that stage is done now, and we're just going to give it a little bit of drying time. I'm going to grab over the other base that I painted the day before, and you can see I've just not quite taken this one up to the same level of brightness. So I'm going to go back into the Vallejo off-white with my dry brush, and I'm going to basically aim to bring that up to the same level. I followed all the same steps, but I've obviously just not gone as hard with the dry brush or not picked as select an area. And as you can see here, I'm just building that up again, and instantly you can kind of see that next level brightness coming up. Because these are for an army project, so I do want all of these bases to match as much as possible. So just going back in, correcting it, not that there was anything kind of wrong as such, just making sure that it matches nicely. And as you can see, I've brought that level up to the same colour. And that is pretty much our bases finished. I'm gonna then go around the rim again with coal black from Pro Acryl, my absolute favourite black, and then I'm going to finish the whole thing with some AK Ultra matte varnish, which I absolutely love as well. And these are the finished products. So this is the base for Ezekiel Abaddon, and then the 90mm oval that I done on today's tutorial will be for the new Warpsmith from the Eldritch Omens box. And I've got a ton more of these bases. I think I've got maybe 40 or 50 in total that I've ordered. They came from Unreal Wargames Studios. I am not affiliated, I haven't been paid or sent anything for free for them. I'll make sure and click a link in the description though, so you can take a look yourself. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, all the rest. Have a good one. See you in the next one.